Okay, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi bismillah. So we're going to start again. For those who just joined us, we're having a special panel here tonight with some of the members of our community who are converts to Islam. We had the benefit of hearing from 3 people so far who just kind of outlined for us what it was like before they became Muslim and why they decided to become Muslim. So we're going to hear from 2 more people, and then I'm just going to ask a few questions that all of you, or a few of you, as many of you would want to answer. We'll open it up for questions to people in the audience as well. If on the live stream, you can just put some of your questions in the live stream comments, and I'll read them off of there. Would either of you want to share, in a similar kind of fashion? Would be great. Yeah.
My name is Karen Jusenby, and I was actually raised in Massachusetts. I'm of Irish and Scottish descent, so I was raised as a Catholic. In my family of origin, I have 1 brother and 1 sister, and my parents. And my parents really encouraged us to attend church and to attend CCD, the Catholic Christian Doctrine teachings. I was taught by nuns. And, we pretty much followed the rules of Catholicism. But from the time that I was about 6 years old, I found myself questioning certain things that were going on in the religion. I didn't really understand why I could pray directly to God, but when I wanted to ask forgiveness, I had to go through another human being for that. That was one thing. And also the Trinity was something that was always confusing for me, because I couldn't understand how, if God created the earth, how his son, who was born, obviously many years later, could be part of creating the earth. I don't know, there were just a lot of things that were a little bit strange for me. So I really consider myself a seeker, and similar to a lot of the other, discussion that you've heard today, there are definitely similarities. I really feel like it was a lifelong journey for me as well. But some of the more defining points for me was that I was actually in the military. I was a medical logistics officer in the Army for 20 years. And that work brought me to Germany to do humanitarian assistance missions into the former Soviet Union. And very similar to your situation, when I was there, it was such a life-changing event, because I would see these countries that, to me, were very prosperous when they were joined as a whole, but when they broke apart, I considered them to be broken societies, because they couldn't function as a whole any longer, the way that the Soviet Union was structured. And for food, shelter, and clothing, poverty different than our poverty. There wasn't necessarily drugs and alcoholism connected with poverty there, which was also a very kind of inspiring and, questioning moment for me. But, I said, why God? Why was I born, as a white Caucasian woman, growing up in the United States, instead of over here, in this area with all the challenges that those people have? I really started to question my existence. And while I was there, I met a young man who, after a couple of years coming back to the States, I invited him to come to the U.S. to decide if we would get married, and we did. And so he started to ask me questions about my faith, that made me question my faith even more. And he was, a native Kazakh, so he was actually just at the point where he could even practice his own religion, because for 7 years under Soviet control, they weren't allowed to do that. And about 3 years after we got married, I decided to convert, but, for me, it was really important that I know I could do everything that I was required to do before I did the conversion. So I practiced fasting, I practiced praying on my own, like I would run home at lunchtime with nobody around, with my little book, and, you know, try to pray without anybody looking over my shoulder saying, no, you're not doing that right, you're not doing that right. And to really make sure that I could do everything that the faith wanted me to before I did that. So I also went to school with the little children in my community. It was a very small community at the time. So I was the senior student in the group, and, you know, tried to practice, you know, at least a few surahs, you know, that I could say with my prayers. And, you know, the people were really, really welcoming. Unfortunately, my ex-husband wasn't as welcoming about it as a lot of the people in the community, particularly for me, the women. I really feel like they were the draw that, you know, pulled me in the rest of the way. But when even today, when I hear the Quran, like, I feel like it goes directly to my heart. Like, it doesn't go up to my head, and I think about it, and it, you know, makes its way down to my heart. I feel like the Quran goes directly to my heart. Many things I still don't understand, but they'll bring me to tears when I hear it. And, you know, the religion, to me, you know, the belief in God and the way it's presented, it just, as others have said, it just makes so much more sense. And, you know, after I proved to myself that I could do everything I needed to do to become a Muslim, then I made the decision to accept Islam. And that was about 17 years ago, actually, almost. It was quite a while. I just want to put a plug in for ICNYU, because this is also a very inviting and inclusive group of people here. You know, where I was in Maryland, we had one mosque, one group of people, but New York provides such opportunity. If you're not happy with what you have, you've got plenty of other choices and places to be, but I really appreciate ICNYU a lot. Thank you for being here for us.
Sure. My name is Kiara Walker, and I converted about 6 months ago, and at the time I was 15, and I still am 15. My process of like converting was very interesting, because like people always ask me what made you convert, and like one of the things that made me convert was pretty much like reading the Bible. Like Christianity made me convert, because like I would read the Bible and I would see things in it, and I remember reading one part of the Bible, and it said that whenever like a woman is praying or prophesying, she has to cover her hair, and like other things in there, and like that really drew me to like the modest side of like everything. And when I would do that, it was like people would look at me like I was crazy, because like I would come to church like just like this, and people would say like you know, like, we're Christian, we don't do that anymore because that's a part of like Babylon tradition, and they used to do that in the old times, and no one does that anymore. But it was in the New Testament, so it should be more relevant than, I guess, the Old Testament. But anyways, yeah, so okay.
People can also move up, just if you want to get closer if you can't hear. Especially if you're sitting in the front, there's a lot of room. You scoot up, people behind you.
So I had told myself that I would still be a Christian, and I would go about my life being a Christian, but I would practice Islam, because Islam seemed as though it was the correct way to be a Christian, and it just felt right. So I would try to teach myself how to pray, and I downloaded like several apps, and I watched several YouTube videos, and that was very frustrating because it just didn't click. But after a while, I started praying and stuff, and I started wearing the hijab in October, and I would practice Islam, but also that was around the time when I was introduced to the IC at NYU, and that really helped me like with wearing the hijab and stuff. But overall, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. So, like I was saying before, opportunity to converts to speak, it usually exists in the frame of what the first part of this discussion has been. We'll ask people to share with us hearing their narrative. They'll feel a boost in kind of their own experience. I think when you build community and you build intentional community, it necessitates in order to really assess and affirm what it is that their needs are. And there's a lot of complexity that exists within all of our identities, but when you look at the specificity that is tied to the convert experience, it can't always be understood through the frame that many people try to understand it in. And I don't want you to think about this in the frame of just good and bad or right and wrong that then has you put your back up against a wall in kind of a defensive mode, saying that, well, this is why I tried this or this is why I did that. But to be able to just, again, listen and hear. Because a lot of what that'll do is broaden for us our perspectives and tie it to understandings that this religion is a lot bigger and broader than sometimes we understand it to be. And what it is that we try to paint in a brush of a collective we can at times be quite exclusive when someone doesn't fit into that we. Or experientially, when someone is coming to ask us a question, yielding to the fact that not only are you Muslim longer than I am, but the fact that you were born into Islam means that you probably know it a little bit better than I do, and we just give answers at times not really understanding that people have lived entire lives prior to the day that they became Muslim. They have family, they have friends, they've had life experiences. There are decisions that are there, whether they are very proud of them or not, that still are part of who it is that they are because it's where they came from and it shapes the person that they're going to continue to be. And so here I would want to not shift the conversation, but to really be able to understand experientially what it's like after the fact, right? I'll give you an example of a good friend of mine who converted to Islam, and he found himself in a place where he walked into the masjid, everyone was really happy. Frame of what it is that I'm thinking about when I say this. And so when he goes into the masjid and he takes his shahada, people are really excited and happy. A few minutes later, the first question that he's asked isn't about anything tied to what does it feel like or how are you doing or do you need anything. But someone says to him, do you have a girlfriend? And he says yes. And they say, is she Muslim? And he says yes. And they say, you have to marry her right away. And he says, well, they were Muslim and they must know this religion better than I do, so he married her. And as they went through the first few, and then his family, his parents, came and sat and had a meal with his in-laws for the first time. And he said that it was weird because they were kind of quiet. They weren't really talking to any of us. And later on, when I asked my wife what the issue was, he himself comes from an African American background, but of a little lighter skin tone, if you will. And his parents, who are also African American, they're black, their skin is darker. And the young woman who he was married to came from an immigrant background. I don't think it's important what part of the world, and if you were trying to figure out what part of the world are you assume, that's also telling you something about yourself. But she said to her husband, well, my parents didn't realize that you were black. And when they met your parents for the first time, that was when they finally understood that I actually married a black person. And then he said a couple of weeks later, her parents made her get divorced from him. And so to understand, this is all happening within the time span, not of years, but of really like months. Which, when Khalil says that I'm in a later phase of my life, but in my deen, I'm quite young. Experientially, an individual is still in those moments learning certain things about what Islam means through the practice of what it is that they're being engaged with by people who are only giving to them what it is that they're giving to them. Do you see what I'm saying? What was it like for you all after you became Muslim? In any direction that you'd want to take that question in.
Well, I can start with that. I became Muslim. I took my Shahada up at 95th Street, and the most overwhelming thing was how many people were there. So, I felt, in the middle of 700 people, and I still kind of, felt alone when I would go up there because, after that first greeting, then it was like life as usual. And with that many people there, it's not exactly the same crowd every week. So invariably, I'm light-skinned and I'm a big guy. So, I went to a lot of different mosques because I just wanted to, see my people. And I had this weird experience. Every time I walked through the door of a mosque, every head in the place would go like this. So I got used to standing out in a crowd. It was really interesting because, growing up, we learned about Islam, but it was always a religion of people that lived way, way on the other side of, lived way far away, and I experienced that when I went to the mosque because people just didn't expect to see me. I lived down in New Jersey, and I went to the closest masjid, which was maybe 10 miles away from me. I just looked it up online, and I went up there, and they were having like a pre-Ramadan like bazaar, and it was like a little event outside, and I pulled into the parking lot and I got out, and as soon as I got out of the car, one of the elders comes scurrying up to me, and he goes, "Can I help you?" Like I thought I was turning into the 7-Eleven parking lot or something. So I just pulled out my kufi and I put it on, and he was like, "Oh, welcome." And so they brought me in, and again, the same kind of, people were, interested at that moment. But then it kind of, nobody really spoke to me. Sometimes I'd get a nod of recognition when I would go over there. But the weirdest thing really was some guy came over and, congratulations. And instead of saying, "How's it going? Do you need any advice?" he looked at me with, trepidation in his eyes, and he's like, "You have to get your parents to convert to Islam so that they don't burn in the hellfire." And I was like, "Whoa," and this was early on. This was literally within the first couple of weeks. So it was a very mixed bag because, I became Muslim. I felt like I belonged, but, I would go around to these different places and I just never really felt quite right, and I was a little bit apprehensive about it. And then they say you're led to where you're supposed to be, and I talked to somebody online who said, you should go to the IC at NYU. And the first time I came down here, it was immediately, it was just my style, academic environment. And I remember at the end, the first time I came to Jummah prayer, I'm kind of standing up on the side, just kind of observing, and Imam Khalid noticed that I was new and came over here and introduced himself, and he's like, well, this is your home now, and that really made a huge difference to me, because it was important that I feel comfortable in like a Muslim space, because my experience before that was kind of feeling still like an outsider, which was strange, because I wanted to belong there, and people kind of looked at me with, you're a convert, as opposed to you're a Muslim, and the question I always ask is, how long do you remain a convert and not just a regular old Muslim? And I don't know the answer to that question, but so it's been a mixed bag, and the only place and then I went back to Saudi, and the feeling was exactly the opposite, because I went back to that place where I wasn't Muslim when I was there, and all of a sudden, wow, it's like Muslim Central. And let me tell you something, it's so much easier to be a Muslim in a Muslim country. I mean, there's a mosque on every corner. They stop, shopping malls, they stop. If you're in McDonald's, they pull the shades down. If you're in a supermarket, you leave your wagon and you go in the back and everybody prays. And it was so easy to do that. And the weird thing was, people assumed I was Muslim, because I just acted like I belonged there. And one of my friends said, people think you're Syrian, so just and included the 777, in the back of the plane, they usually have this area that's curtained off for like maybe 3 meters by 3 meters, and so when you're in the air, it's kind of any time you decide it's prayer time, so you just get up, go back, and when you're flying towards there, you face forward in the plane, and when you're coming back to New York, you pray towards the back of the plane. It was like so easy. And I relay that to a few people, and they said, have to work to be one, the more rewards that you get, because you have to make that extra effort. It doesn't come as easy, but wow, it was really easy when I went back over there. So that's kind of I would say it's a mixed bag, because some people don't want to hear the story. They're not, and they sometimes I feel that I'm looked upon with suspicion, and one of my friends joked with me and said, are you sure they don't think that you're like, a spy for the police department? And I'm like, well, if they were going to spy on a masjid, they wouldn't send one looking like you. They send somebody looking like you. So it's kind of counterintuitive. But I guess for anyone who just came in, you can't let those, it's human nature. You can't let little episodes like that get you down, because you were invited by the big boss. And so you kind of have to, you really need to take control over those experiences and kind of learn from them and be persistent. And, walk into a masjid, act like you belong. I went back to my alma mater in Cleveland for homecoming, and I went to the local masjid, which I was fascinated. And I went there for 4 years. I had no idea that to the imam, and of course he knows Khalid, so and so so that was a terrific experience, because wow, if I obviously I'm becoming part of the community, if I could say, oh yeah, I know your guy back in New York. So anyway,
other thoughts people want to respond? What was it like after? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd say after I converted, it was like I had converted in like the middle of the school year. So like in the beginning, I would tell myself like, oh, I would wear jeans and like a hijab on like the days that I had school. So because I was too afraid to like start wearing a dress and stuff. I was like, what would people think of me? So eventually I started wearing like a dress and the abaya and like hijab. But like in the beginning it was really nice because there was like people would give me gifts, people would be really nice to me, and overall I kept in contact with a lot of people. But then it was like when like months later it was like hard in a way because like you know like I started to realize that like nobody in my family is Muslim, and like there's no one that can really relate with me, and like there's no one that's going to wake me up when it's time to pray, or like that's going to remind me, and there's no one that's going to be like just trying to boost up my faith or anything. But after a while it started to get better because my little sister, she's like 9 or 8 years old, either one, and she sometimes she prays with me and stuff, and she always tells me like, Kiara, when I get older I'm gonna be Muslim like you. And she's like, when I get older no one's gonna tell me no. So it's kind of like getting better because like now my mom, she can relate to me in a way, because she was like, when she told me like when she was younger she considered converting, but like she never took it as far as I did. But yeah, it certainly opened up like a lot of opportunities, and I've met a lot of people and stuff.
I think for myself, the most challenging part for me was my family of origin. I had been supporting my husband in the community for 3 years before I converted, so I was actually kind of accepted in the community already, but my family of origin, a totally different story. Every single one of them that were still living was just like, you've got to be kidding me. What are you doing? You know, how can you take on another faith? You were raised in Catholicism. You should still be a Catholic. My mother, the first time I put, total Muslim garb on, she literally sat there and cried. And she was visiting at my house at the time, and within 2 days she went back to Massachusetts and said, I just can't be here now. And I credit actually 9/11 as being the force that helped her to understand the situation better, because she started, she was a big news watcher, so she started seeing, across the country, these people were getting harassed, the people were getting killed, blah, 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 blah. And she started calling me to ask, Karen, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Because, I was in Maryland, she was in Massachusetts, and I really think that it helped to break down some barriers of her impression of the faith. Because the other thing, too, is that I think what Islam does for a convert is it just enhances who they are as an individual. The person that I was before, I was still that. I didn't change, I didn't become something different, but it just kind of enriched who I was. And then when they saw that I wasn't, a different person, I wasn't acting different, in fact, I was probably acting more considerate, they eventually, they seemed to accept, my choice. But that was really, really hard for a couple of years, to know that your family had, kind of just kicked you to the curb and were waiting to see if you were going to change your mind and, come back to what you were before.
Well, thanks for sharing that. My experience is kind of a lot different, because when I decided that Islam was for me, I started just straight up kind of practicing at my own pace, and I didn't really tell a lot of people. Like, the hijab was like one thing that I did slightly, kind of like a gradual thing. People, like, I was in a dorm at that point. I called my parents, like, they knew that this was something that was very serious for me. But on my floor, they just knew, like, okay, Cassie's doing this thing. Sometimes she's going to wear this, sometimes she's not. No one really asked that many questions. and I just kind of went about it just myself and, you know, kind of my laptop sometimes. And by doing that, I actually found out that some of my floor mates were Muslim, and, you know, I was able to ask them questions sometimes. But I really appreciated that those Muslims on the floor that I lived on were, alhamdulillah, and they never, like, probed too much. They never, like, asked me too many questions, and they never overwhelmed me, alhamdulillah. So I was very happy about that. And then eventually I started, you know, seeking out more Muslims, because when I converted, like, I tell people I was the first Muslim I ever knew. I didn't have any Muslim friends or anything. Like, in the town in Georgia that I was in, there was a Muslim at my high school, but I never really interacted with her much, and it was never something that clicked for me, that, you know, to see a person and their, like, in conjunction with their faith, kind of. I always see a person as their person. Alhamdulillah, if they're a Muslim, alhamdulillah, they're a Muslim. If they're not, alhamdulillah. It doesn't really matter to me. So I kind of just have, like, a different approach to that question because of that.
What was it like after you became a Muslim, just in terms of learning about Islam? When you had questions, you're looking for resources, how did that work?
The internet is a scary place.
Yeah.
So just when you try to enunciate your voice, and just in the interest of time, if we also try to keep, not answers short, like say whatever you feel like, but just so that, we're kind of mindful of the time as well. Yeah.
I feel like everything that I've learned that was worth learning or that made sense most of the time, unless it's something very small and technical, like going on the internet is just like a terrible idea. Like, it's either going to be like, even if it's correct, it's going to be like they're going to cite like 29 hadiths before they even get to the answer to your question. And like, I don't, like, you convert, like, I grew up in Boston also. I don't know why there's so many Massachusetts people on this thing, but unconscious bias on my part, sorry. And like, like, I don't, like, they're like, oh, but Aisha radiallahu anha exactly. The only words I know how to say in Arabic are the ones that are required to, like, wake up sleeping 7th graders. So, like, which is like, yalla, yalla, yalla. Like, that's all I got. And on the internet, and then you've got stuff that's wrong for so many different reasons. Like, there's people who are trying to, like, say, like, you can't be friends with non-Muslims anymore. I've seen that out there. And I'm like, okay, but I really like my mom, though. And then there's things that, like, on the other end that's like, why Muhammad is a false prophet. And you're like, oh, God, okay, I shouldn't, watch that video. So I think as far as learning, like, it's all been here for almost everything. Like, just asking people, like Imam Khalid, or like we do have educational programming. We're working on making it a little bit more consistent for people, but you have to talk to someone who has a face and is real, because in my experience, like, talking to the interwebs is just not a good idea.
Yeah, and I would just interject, as much as it is an opportunity to find humor, like, think about if you're the person who is the first Muslim you've ever met, is you yourself, and you're on the internet, and you've embraced something that you believe has truth to it, and now you read something that tells you you're not supposed to have any type of attachment or affection for people who are not Muslim. And it's not really funny at that point. Because in your head, you have to then be able to digest, how do I really engage my mother? How do I really engage my friends? How do I really engage my significant other? How do I find myself in a place where I really deal with emotions that I have that are positive emotions, that are uplifting, but now we're in a place where I somehow have to reconcile with something else that I've embraced as a truth that I can't really deny. And I know a lot of converts. In our community, we have a lot. My wife is a convert. I've met people who have said that they wished that Islam didn't make sense to them. That they could be in a place where they could just deny it. But now when it's written in a way that's not mindful of the reader, and it says in these very explicit ways, by the way, like, you're not supposed to have this type of relationship with somebody, which is not only very untrue, but the person then embraces it in a certain way. There's friends of mine who are like big scholars of religion, who are converts, who after they converted, because of what people told them, they wouldn't even enter into the homes of their families. They damaged relationships with their families so much, and they would literally like live in tents outside of their parents' homes because Muslims told them you can't go into the homes of people who are not Muslim. And that frame is important to be able to understand. Whether you're born into Islam or you've converted into it, when you give somebody information, they're going to take it from you. And if you speak without really knowing what the consequences are, it doesn't mean that there's not consequences. And then you have to go back and repair certain things. And because most of us are not there beyond that day when someone takes a shahada, and we don't even ask the question, as we're laughing about it, why is she on the internet learning anyway? Like, where was I? Why wasn't I teaching her? Why not right after the moment she converted, I didn't jump to be her teacher, but as her sister or brother, I was her supporter, so she didn't even have to look to the internet. You see what I'm saying? And within the story, like, really hear what's being said. And think about it not through a prism that is just your experience, but understand somebody lived this. And if they believe that's what this new religion that they're embracing tells them to do, either they're not going to do it and they're going to distance themselves from something that they believe has validity, or they will do it and they're going to distance themselves from themselves even more. You see what I'm saying? What was it like for the rest of you? Learning, trying to understand, like deep in your relationship.
It was stressful and scary. I remember the first time I really tried to find a scholar, so to say, is when I was finally kind of interacting with the MSA at my school, Boston University, and I went to a halakha, and I had no idea what that was. But I was excited, I was nervous, I didn't really know what to do or anything, but alhamdulillah, I was in a very good community there. I felt very supported, and when I graduated, I actually went to our chaplain, who was a student, PhD, I think, student at another university. So he's a very young man, but alhamdulillah, he takes a lot of time to learn on his own and try to teach others. I went up to him, like, towards graduation, we had our senior farewell party, and I told him, thank you for being my first teacher. And like, it was like this moment for him. It was like, oh my gosh, I was this woman's first teacher as well. Like, the brothers and sisters, when someone takes their shahada, you are our first teachers.
What was the transition like overall? Like, what things were easy, what things were difficult?
Well, I taught myself how to pray using YouTube videos. They're like little cartoons of a 7-year-old Egyptian boy, and I used it on my phone, and I just followed it and kept following it, and I wrote it out on an index card, and like within a month I could do it. So I was pretty psyched about that, because the first time I could do the prayers completely by myself, I was really proud. But the on the other side, it was weird, because people, will tell you things kind of in absolute terms, even though it's not true. But I didn't know it was not true. I didn't know in the beginning that there are different schools, and as long as one of them says it's okay, then you can kind of choose it. And one of the ones, I think I mentioned before, I got into a huge fight online with a guy about making wudu over socks. because he insisted that when I was at work, I had to take my bare feet and lift them this high and put them in the sink where my coworkers like come into the bathroom. Like, I can't do that. And he basically said, you absolutely have to, or none of your prayer is valid. And it really freaked me out. And another one said, I can't wish my mother a happy Easter, because if you wish a Christian a happy whatever their holiday is, then you're adopting their religion. And I had a big fight about it. I'm like, well, no, I'm not celebrating Easter, but I wish my mother a happy Easter because I wish her to have one. And there was a lot of examples of that, and I happen to be lucky because all of my friends back over in the Middle East, you have WhatsApp. You basically have an instant, communication. And so I really reached out to them a lot. Where I was like, someone told me this, and I would send it out to people, and I would say, don't, just ignore that. You're doing it. Questions about like halal meat and stuff like that. A lot of the stuff came up. So it was a little bit overwhelming in the beginning because you want to. And I was reading it through, and I'm like, every time you step through a doorway or you got up out of a chair or whatever, like, I was like, how can I, I felt like you couldn't do anything, you couldn't take a step without saying something in this book, and, my friends were basically like, keep that and look at it, but, don't worry, because, I stepped out of the restroom, did I use my left foot or my right foot? Oh my God, I'm looking in this book, and so, I had to go through that phase of wanting to do everything perfectly and then kind of stepping into reality where, I'm in a learning phase and just kind of take it easy and kind of see the big picture and when in doubt, just look at go back to the basics. So.
What tends to happen is like we give people what we have the ability to give to them. And so many people who convert into Islam, whose primary entry point allows for them to feel spiritual upliftment, because they're thinking about God in certain ways, then take steps that for a long time deal with like mechanics and form and the physical, but are devoid of conversations beyond things that are legalistic. Like, who are you praying to? And how do you convey that to somebody as you teach them prayer? Like, whose sake are you fasting for? And how is that not left out of the conversation? So that what it was that brought somebody in doesn't suddenly now get shelved, because everything is about the right and the wrong and the do's and the don'ts. And even there, it's not in a systematic way or in a formulaic way that lends towards a conclusion of some kind, but this is all I know, and this is what Islam means to me, so I'm just going to throw it all at you. Because it's not even just about you, it's about me feeling better about myself that I gave you something. But I don't know how to talk to you about God, because I don't reflect on who God is to myself ever. I couldn't really give you an understanding of like, what does compassion really mean? Like, what does love really mean? What does mercy really mean? What does forgiveness really mean? And within the specificity of it, I don't really distinguish between what are obligations and prohibitions and things that are recommended and things that might not be the best things to do, but they don't fall into the realm of haram. But there is no real delineation, because it's just, I'm giving you what it is that I have, and when I don't know, rather than saying I don't know, I just kind of supply what it is that I think. And then it makes things really hard. It makes it really confusing. Right? The day after you become Muslim, you don't suddenly download the Quran into your head. You don't suddenly learn Arabic as kind of, automatic, but there's not necessarily a recognition that says your assistance of somebody who converts, whether you were born into Islam or you're a convert, because converts do it to converts a lot too, is not to support them so that you feel better about yourself. But your support for them has to really recognize like where the person is coming from. Do you see what I'm saying? Like the difference that's there. What else?
I feel like something we haven't touched on a whole lot, except for a little bit, is like family issues. And I feel like I've talked to, like in the time that I've been like managing this group, I've talked to a lot of people who have like just converted or just told their families, and then there are some people who still haven't talked to their families about this, and they're like, it's just not, it's sort of out of the question for them. But one of the things that I've noticed is that people kind of, they do these things to kind of draw boundaries between what is me and what is our family, and you know, how far away are you getting from me, like if you're my daughter or my brother or whatever, like how, you know, what, they sort of do these little weird sort of scientific experiments some of the time. Like I have one friend who says that every time she goes home, her dad will offer her a glass of wine, and just casually, just like, you want a drink? And she'll be like, still no, like I still don't want one. It's been, you know, 8 years or something. And it's just, but it's this weird little kind of test that he's doing, because maybe he can't bring himself to be like, hey, are you still Muslim? Or like, is that still really a thing, or was that just a phase? And so I have this, I feel like I hear a lot of different stories that all sound like different families and moms and brothers and sisters kind of trying to like see whether you've turned into a different person, and see whether you're gonna leave them, and see whether they're gonna lose you, but they don't know how to express that in words, so they just do weird stuff like sneak pork into your food, or like or you know, ask you if you want a drink, or, and then there's the other way where like they'll do these little gestures that mean that I'm accepting this, but they don't say it out loud, but like my mom bought me a hijab, and even though like when I came home wearing it the first time, she cried, so like, but she couldn't bring herself to say like, oh, I've thought about this and I understand now, but she bought me a hijab for like my birthday or something, and so I think that means that she's taking it. And so I would, like, I know there's a lot of converts here, like there's maybe other people like watching, I would sort of say that like most of the time your family just doesn't want to lose you, because they love you, and you know, there's a lot of other stuff mixed in there, like prejudice and closed-mindedness and things, but for the most part they just do these weird things to you to try to see if you're still their kid, or you're still their brother. And I've seen like it over and over again with lots of different people with lots of different backgrounds and stories, that like eventually the little weird science experiments turn into like weird science experiments of acceptance rather than of like rejection or of testing you. So I don't know, yeah, but that's just what I've noticed.
People want to add on to that in any way? Sure. At the end, we're gonna take some questions and comments. Yeah. What does it feel like to have a family that's not Muslim?
What does it feel like to have family that is Muslim?
You know, I think for me, being born into a Muslim family, there's certain questions that just never come up. I don't have to think about celebrations in certain ways. I don't have to think about funerals in certain ways. I don't have to think about holidays in certain ways. You know, as was said, experientially, life is very different, right? Like growing up, I had a mother who made food for me as we were getting ready to get the day started for fasting, and would make a meal when we would break fast. I think whenever there's a holiday, I don't have to worry if somebody is going to actually wish me a holiday, or if I'm going to be sitting in my apartment by myself trying to figure out how to celebrate it on my own, because people forgot to invite me to something. So I think in certain spaces, people who are born into Islam at times take for granted some of the relationships that they have, and also don't recognize at times why that becomes that much more imperative to be supportive, in a communal sense, but also as an individual sense, and embody like what it means to be a brother and a sister through like real brotherhood and sisterhood in relationships with people who embrace the religion at a later point in time.
One of the things, I think as a convert, there are certain kind of experiences that I treasure greatly, that to my friends who are Muslim their whole life, they wouldn't even give it a second thought. It's just part of the daily routine. And one of those things is, praying in a communal prayer, praying next to, praying in a row of brothers. Most of my prayers are done in solitude, and so, it's a huge, I would call it a treat. I mean, I'm so much happier when I get to pray in community. And some of you know I've been very sick for the past year, and thank God I finally turned that corner, and I'm starting to really feel so much better. But I couldn't come to Jummah prayers, and it weighed really heavily on me. And on the other side of that, when I went back to visit my friends in Saudi, they kind of put me on the spot, and they said, when you come here, you're going to have to lead us in prayer. And I was like, I said, well, as long as you don't laugh at my New Jersey accented Arabic. But it was something that was very symbolic. I mean, they pray together with, they have a family gathering. The men will pray together, all the time. But when I did it, and I led them in prayer, and it was my, and it was these friends, and it meant so much to me. I mean, it was an everyday thing for them, but it was a hugely important kind of milestone for me. And I think that's a kind of a uniquely convert experience, because if you've grown up praying every day with your family, how would you even kind of experience that? But that's probably one of the biggest things for me.
Yeah, I think I feel like I'm really lucky in that I've sort of you find like a family here, especially if your family like as accepting as they have eventually gotten to be. Like they're still in Boston, so but every once in a while you do get this feeling that like I need them, like I need my New York family sort of more than they need me, because like if like I've met a lot of amazing people here, and that's great, but like if they all have their family or their other friends, and like this whole sort of like network that they've had because like ethnically or whatever, like they have all these people that are kind of built into their lives already, and I don't, and so like I need them to like I'm kind of like, I'm not sure how to articulate this, like I'm dependent on the fact that they're gonna reach out to me every time, because if they don't, then like where else am I supposed to go? So yeah.
I think just in the interest of time, we want to have any questions from the audience, any responses, any feedback. If you try to keep things very succinct, to not go into like long statements of your own, but whatever it is that you feel like would be important to kind of bring up We could take a few minutes for that right now. Yeah.
I'm also a convert, and one of the first things that I did was I'm Puerto Rican, try to find other Puerto Ricans, other Hispanics, who converted to Islam, to find out what their experiences were like, and then and then also expand your search. Like one thing, I do go to two places. I come here during Ramadan, when I do the nightly prayer, the overnight prayer. But I go to a mosque in New Jersey because they have a big Hispanic population there at Union City. And I'm part of that Dawah committee. So it is important to kind of try to have that sense of community, because when you talk about what it's like to have a family that's not Muslim, it's like, when the holidays, I don't have anybody to share those with. There are times when I've come here for the overnight prayers, and I see everybody who's come with their spouses, and their family, like, I'm by myself. I'm not sharing this with anybody. And sometimes that's kind of tough. I wish there was somebody I could come with that's part of my blood, or somebody I care about, to share this experience with, because I enjoyed coming all those nights. I mean, I've done it, I think, 4 years in a row already. It's a very enjoyable, very fulfilling experience, but I'm not sharing with anybody. And that's the tough part from a convert. It's like a lot of these experiences, like it took me, when I first started learning Arabic, I'll be real quick, it took me 16 months to read the Quran from start to finish in Arabic. But I didn't have anybody to share that with. Like, this is some achievement. That when I first started reading the Quran, the first page would last 2 hours. By the time I finished, I could read a page in 20 minutes. But I couldn't share that with anybody. So those are the tough things that you deal with as a convert. Anyway, I want to stop to give other people time to talk.
Okay, that's okay. You wanted to say something?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to comment on the young lady was speaking about earlier. Sometimes the family tries to challenge you. I noticed that sometimes with family, but I also noticed that with people in the public, other religions, that they don't view religion sometimes as something that is a relationship with the Creator. They view it in a more personal way, as kind of like a sportsmanship. Like, one religion is superior to another because of a name, and irregardless of what the religion is founded on, or the tenets of the religion that support the religion, they focus on a name or a personality. That's the main argument. And I just wanted to say that when you encounter those situations, if you can shed some light on the person, that's good. But if not, you should turn away from those kinds of conversations, because they don't help our spiritual growth.
Okay. Yeah, Marlene.
Assalamu alaikum. I would like to invite everybody, converts and born Muslims, to welcome everybody. I try to do that when I'm here, and some sisters have pointed out that I am the first person, especially students, that when they come here as a new person, as a new Muslim, they feel welcome, because you talk to them, you say hello, you give them a hug, you tell them this is your home. Because if you are part of this community, everybody that comes here is part of this community. I don't have an ID that says that I'm part of this community. I participate here, so it's my community. And it's everybody's community, so it's everybody's job to make each other to feel welcome. So I would ask that we do that. If we see somebody that is by themselves, if it's a brother, it's your job as brothers to ask him, to welcome him. And for the sisters, it's our jobs, everybody's.
Thank you for saying that. That's really important. I like to travel a lot to different masjids. I like to say I go masjid hopping a lot, because that's some way that I try to find community. That's some way I try to find somewhere where I belong. And it's hard when you go into a masjid where either there's no sisters, or none of the sisters give you salam, or the sisters say, astaghfirullah, you shouldn't be wearing that, or you're praying wrong, especially when they find out you're a convert. But I remember talking to someone who was born Muslim, and I told him, because I went to a masjid with this brother, and I came out so happy from the sister side, like, a sister gave me salam, a sister gave me salam, you know, she returned my salam, and he's like, it's kind of sad to think that that's a level, like that's the bar that I personally have of a masjid or a musalla, is just that someone returns my salam.
And I met a young woman who was a convert to Islam, and she found herself in a community, like many masjids, very ethnocentric. And I would say, like, it's not problematic in ways that at times that we think about to have a masjid that is very ethnocentric, but thinking about consequentially, like, what that does to people sometimes. This young woman converted to Islam, brotherhood, sisterhood, excited to kind of be with people. She said when she would go into the masjid, thinking that people would welcome her in and kind of provide her with warmth, people would not return her salams similarly. And what it started to do for her, like day after day of just being in that place, that she now started to develop like severe body image issues. She believed that she was very ugly, because why else wouldn't somebody from this great religion like give me salam or not return mine? And she said the women would just not speak to her. When she would come around them, they would speak in a different language. Some would do it purposely, some not so much, but it all still had the same impact. She said when she in a vacuum, like she believes that she is ugliness, right? She believes she lacks beauty, and you think and conceptualize what's going on in the psyche of somebody that if they already believe that they lack beauty, and now when they turn to you, you immediately turn away. You just look in the opposite direction. They're in the elevator with you, and you turn your back on them. So she said she got to such a place of agitation, she couldn't even look in the mirror anymore. And where she got to was something that was so overwhelming that she tried to then overdose on different medications. And when it didn't work out for her, and she went to the internet because no one else was talking to her, she read suicide is haram. So as she's sitting with me and has never spoken to me before, but just randomly meets me after a lecture I gave at a conference and just lets this all out, she said, I'm just waiting to die now. And so it makes a difference, right? Where somebody doesn't speak the language that you speak and you're talking in a different language. And it doesn't mean that you have to let go of parts of your identity, but you be mindful of the fact that now when there's shared space or diversity in space, like what does that mean? Or if someone doesn't really know or doesn't really understand, that you just impose upon them or you kind of brush by them. And there's like wisdom in the prophetic tradition. Where the Prophet ﷺ, he says that you won't enter paradise until you believe, and you won't believe until you love one another. Can I tell you what will increase that love? Just spread the salam amongst yourselves. And if you think about that, not in a Sunday school way, but in terms of the narratives that we're hearing, the presence of something can yield that muhabba, that hub, but the absence of it can lead to that feeling of marginalization and heavy isolation. Where our Prophet said, like, you smile at people in such a way that it can actually be a sadaqah, it's a charity, right? Like, when was the last time you smiled at someone in such a way that it wasn't a charity in the sense that you are above somebody and you're giving to them because they're beneath you with a sense of entitlement, but you smiled with that sense of love, that it wasn't anything less than what sadaqah really would bring to somebody, right? It's filling a need in such a way. Do you extend salams? Do you give salams? I went to Masjid al-Taqwa, where Imam Siraj al-Hajj is the imam. A lot of you know him, great guy, mashallah, also a convert. He went to NYU. And I was like 18 years old, was trying to figure out what this deen meant to me. I'm walking around in baggy jeans and Timbs, and I have a thobe on and my turban, and I'm on Atlantic Avenue, and I'm looking for Ali's roti shop and all these kinds of things.
This place is good.
And I recognized Imam Siraj from across the street. He had no idea who I was, 18-year-old kid. And so it's like, whoa, there's Siraj al-Hajj. And I waved to him. Imam Siraj al-Hajj, who has ran over this globe multiple times to help people raise money for their causes, to help people in times of need, gets in a car and drives across the country for anybody who asks. He didn't just wave to me from across the street, but he ran through traffic, came and shook my hand, smiled the Siraj al-Hajj smile, said, do you need anything? Can I do anything for you? And after I just kind of stuttered and was like, this is great. He then returned back through traffic, back to where he was, and continued doing what he was doing. That's how you give salam to somebody, man. Especially the person who you hugged the day that they took their shahada, and the next day, like, you didn't invite them to anything. So it makes a difference, right? If there's just overt unfamiliarity in places where your heart is trying to just find familiarity. You see what I mean? And I don't want you to take the narratives that I'm sharing for you as something that you think is a rarity. The unfortunate reality is that a lot of people deal with a lot of mess because we don't give them the etiquette that they deserve, right? There's not real ihsan there, or a sense of adab, as well as mindfulness that says there's complexity to people's identity. They're not just what we perceive of them, but they've come from a certain place. You see what I'm saying? I want to give, unless people have more thoughts or questions, any type of feedback, I wanted to give you all just some time to close out the conversation. I wanted to also just take the opportunity to thank you profusely for sharing with us your experiences, your narratives, what it is that you've seen and been through. I know for me, alhamdulillah, it's been a very eye-opening and insightful experience. And pray, inshallah, that Allah increases you all and makes you a continued source of benefit for everyone, and makes you from amongst those who are most beloved to Him. But if you want to take a few minutes to just share any closing thoughts, closing remarks that you feel like we would benefit from, then we'll make a quick dua and pray Isha, inshallah. Or not.
We all know how long your du'as take. We don't.
I won't make it. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Comment, just to kind of follow up on some of the difficulties post-conversion, is I think, for me, what I didn't realize were the different lines that were kind of drawn in Islam, right? Like the actual like Islam, what it is, and then the cultural interpretation of that, and how that looks like in different groups. Like, I'm from the Bronx, so we have a large Nigerian population, and the way that they practice Islam is very different than like a Pakistani masjid would be like in New Jersey. And on top of that, learning that there are different schools of thought, and if you're looking for instruction or someone to kind of teach you, especially if you look for the internet, it's not going to say like, this is from the Shafi school and this is kind of what we do. And that's something that you learn in time. It's very layered, and it takes a lot of time to kind of pierce through that and to figure out kind of what works for you and what you feel to be the truth. And that's something that as a convert I'm still dealing with, is like, who is this from, and like, what do you believe, and what culture are you from, and how does your culture inform the way that you view your faith? And you have to look through guidance from anybody, like through those lenses.
Darius, you want to say something? You look like you want to say something.
Oh, wow. I mean, By the way, assalamu alaikum. I'm Darius. By the way, I moved here with August. And I actually reached out to why I signed up. I seen why Georgia appreciated it. Again, she hits me up with everything, and I reached out to her in regards to meeting another fellow revert. And I live in Jersey City, and I told Steve Moncala we met. So if anybody's from here, no offense, I hate it. But there's a reason why, and the brothers and sisters here have stated it because, you know, alhamdulillah, like Chris, Ahmed, another brother Kamal back here, you know, have made it a lot more bearable. I've only been able to make 3 Jummahs since I moved here. When I was in Houston, I was a head strength coach of HBCU. Since I converted or reverted, I made every Jummah. I grew up Catholic as well. I'm from New Orleans, so that's up until the early 1900s. By law, that city was Catholic. And I went through a whole transition as well, trying to find where I belong. I never felt like I belonged in Christianity. I even became a Baptist preacher in my late 20s. And there are times, just like you know, what you said, sis, about being happy that somebody gives you salam. Or return back to your salam, because I have a friend of mine who left the deen. He, inshallah, is coming back, but at a period of time when apostate. And I'm very, very sensitive when I feel like I'm not accepted in somewhere. Because that feeling of what happened, and knowing all of the experiences that he went through, the racism, separatism, culturalism that one can experience in a masjid setting. And it's like all we want is what a lot of born Muslims have. You know what I'm saying? It's one of the worst feelings in the world is to feel lonely in the midst of people. You know, because it's a situation where, you know, of course, for whatever reason, and I don't know if anybody else's situation is different. Oh, you Muslim now? Alhamdulillah. You must get married. Brother, I have sister for you, mashallah. She lives in another country. She's still legally married. She has 2 children, but it's okay. She's not. And that's what we get. That's what I got.
We get it too.
But not knowing and having these kind of dialogues, I mean, I think that needs to increase, and that's big for me. But you know, like when it goes to the holidays, it's scary. Like I'm afraid to go through Ramadan here. Because everybody that I knew that was a part of my community was in Houston. You know, it was my brother Bashir, and like Chris and I, we both shared the Maliki Method. And so I guess I kind of latched on to him real. That's my dude, for real. And every Friday we would have a book reading. It wasn't about what we were reading. It was that so we as the brothers and their families or whoever, somebody would sponsor that night. If you haven't eaten that night, there were times I didn't eat. I was hungry. Nobody asked me at the masjid if I needed anything. You know what I'm saying? Here I am working at a college level making 45 grand. You know what I'm saying? Nothing. But here it is, this brother like come and eat. So my message is if anybody, you're not too young. Don't think that you don't have what somebody needs. Because if you just say hello to that to that person, you don't know what that person is going through. That's basic psychology. If you smile and speak to that person, it can mean a difference of them. And I know this is on the extreme. It can change their life. It can keep them from possibly taking their lives. Because it's hard hearing these stories because I go through it all the time. You know what I'm saying? There's times where I'm like, I talk to Allah, I don't want this no more. Inshallah, I made 3 years in July 27th. And there's times where I don't want to be Muslim anymore because I love it too much. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. I've never felt this connection with my Lord before. But then at the same token, to know where I'm in a place where I have to wear somebody else's cultural clothing because the brother says I shouldn't wear tights underneath my shorts. Astaghfirullah, brother. Dude, if you got looking at my calves, we got a problem. You know, or I shouldn't pray with my hands to my side because that's wrong. Dude, you just straight, what, how old are you, 12? 36 years old? Go sit down, son. So being able to have somebody I can speak to, like older brothers, oh my God, there's this older brother that's like 90 years old. You see him, shakes your hand, automatically gives you dua. He keeps me going. Having that keeps you going. But then there's those times when you get bombarded with so much judgment where you can only, and I think we've all been there. I don't care if you're born or revert, where you just don't feel like praying. You just don't feel like being around anybody. You know what I'm saying? But it's situations like this, mashallah, this is what we need. You know what I'm saying? So if you see somebody, just speak to them. Give them salam. You know what I'm saying? It makes my day. Yo, they say salam. Okay, cool. We working with something. And that's my time, because I don't want to, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm going to get too emotional. For real.
Thank you, brother.
Jazakallah.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, it's kind of like a question, but it's also kind of like, I guess where I'm coming from is, so I have a very different experience. I grew up as a very religious Orthodox Jew, and there's not a lot of Jewish converts that I, ever encountered. It's very, very hard. And I was just wondering if you could just think about, or maybe, maybe take it away, is there any sort of part of you, I was very practicing, and I believed my religion. I didn't know there was anything else. My ex-husband is how I got introduced, and so I still, there's certain parts of my belief that came from my upbringing from different religion. So just like, is there any sort of way that you have to like reconcile parts of who you used to be with who you are now? And like, for instance, like I confront, like my whole family is, very Orthodox, and they confront me all the time and say things like, for instance, like the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they don't say that, but they're like, how is he just a prophet? Like in the Judaism belief, it's like, it's a false prophet. Stuff like, I believe in the prophet very strongly, but like, it's kind of like you're confronted with these hard questions, and you used to believe something for so long, and then you believe, because I don't know if everyone, different people, come to their faith with, no background in spirituality or anything, but I came with strong certain pieces of spirituality that now I'm trying to grapple with. How do I be parts of me who I used to be? I'm still that person, but I'm a new person because I have Islam. So, like, I was just wondering if there's any way you try to like kind of like reconcile or fuse parts of your old self with who you are and still are, because you're the same person. So that's just kind of my question.
Does anyone else? I just want to say, for me, I view it more as a starting place than anything, because I grew from these past experiences, these past beliefs. So I don't regret those beliefs. I don't regret that I thought that way. I just felt that it was a chapter that I needed to take to further my deen, really. If back then, when I believed that there was no God, there was a period of time when I did believe that. If I didn't have that phase in my life, I don't think I would appreciate a lot as much as I do now.
I would say, like, I came up from, like, a background that was kind of similar, but not exactly the same. Like, we were Seventh-day Adventists, and, like, a lot of things, it's a part of Christianity, but it's, like, a lot of things is very similar to, like, Jewish tradition and stuff, but, we don't acknowledge anything that Jews would. But, yeah, we were Christian, but, like, we didn't eat pork, and we dressed modestly, and, it was like a lot of that helped me to become Muslim and to kind of like be okay with that in a way. Like, I was already used to like not eating pork, so that wasn't big for me. But like at the same time, like we emphasized a lot on like being a vegan and being vegetarian. And like one big thing was like not to eat shrimp because they're bottom feeders and algae and all of that. It's not good for you. So like now, like I'll go to like the halal food truck with my friends, and they're like, "Oh yeah, let me get a shrimp biryani or something." And I'm like, but like when I was Seventh-day Adventist, I didn't eat that, so like it's still kind of hard for me to like just start eating shrimp. But yeah, I think it, like she said, it does help you form into who you are now.
May I suggest maybe that in the future we can have maybe a class or a halakha where we can discuss and unpack these things, like what are the commonalities between the three Abrahamic religions, but from the convert's point of view, and like address like her question, and maybe my questions from Christianity, and to speak about it openly and not be shy about anything, and just to deconstruct the things, because sometimes I also have that as an attack from my family, to not to believe in the Virgin Mary, not to believe in Jesus anymore, and to be in the Son of God and being God, because there is this mixed thing. And how do I answer that? How do I? So that sometimes it shakes us. So
Sure,
I
yeah.
think that we need to address it like in terms of education.
Well, I mean, I like to add. I mean, it's interesting that you bring this up, because as part of my kind of process, I kind of looked at, I was very familiar with Judaism because of where I grew up in New York, and I grew up a Roman Catholic, and then so here's Islam, and my initial impression was that it was going to be totally different than everything. But when I looked at it from a kind of a academic perspective, it was really interesting, because I find some aspects of Islam to remind me of Orthodox Judaism, and there are other aspects of it that remind me of Catholicism, and it really showed me that the roots are they say the three Abrahamic religions, but I actually got to come to my own conclusion about that, and really see the similarities, and so that made me feel a lot better, because I didn't feel like I was necessarily abandoning everything. I just had to give up a few things and take on a whole bunch of other new things. But and I think it would be cool to have like a comparative study, because I just don't think people really give that a lot of thought.
Great. You wanted someone to say something? So I think just.
I was going to say, I have a quick question, I'm sorry. So, you guys are, as you're coming into religion, you're learning a lot yourselves, but I'm sure there were a lot of people asking you guys questions, family, friends, people who don't practice. What were some of the biggest misconceptions, or I guess unexpected questions you guys got as you were making your way into the religion?
This will also just be the last question that interested Tom.
Well, I can say, people ask me about Jesus, and I was anticipating that, so, when I kind of prepared myself, I was like, Muslims totally love Jesus, and they were like, really? And then I go to explain, I'm like, well, they think that he was sent, chosen by God to bring, a message to mankind. And they're like, well, that's what we think too. I'm like, I know. I said, and then I just tell them, I said, the only thing is that we don't believe that he's, the Son of God, but, he's still awesome, and, we still love Jesus. And even that little bit, people were like, oh, okay. And it was kind of it made Islam seem less, out there and less foreign. Like, oh, we believe in Abraham. Oh, really? Oh, yes. And
Moses.
Moses. And really Moses, and I told them about the Kaaba and who built it, and they're like, really? Wow, that's amazing. And so that I found that it kind of disarms people when you kind of you anticipate the questions.
We get a lot about women and the oppression of women, and do they make you wear that, and why do you have to sit in the back, and just like it's very hard to at least from where I'm coming from, where a lot of my friends are like very Western, like left-wing feminists, but don't understand that there's other forms of feminism other than just like this one type of Western feminism. So yeah, I think that is like, I don't know, even my own like parents who, you'd think that they they half their time they spend talking about how they they think I'm the most perfect genius child they've ever seen in their entire lives because they're my parents, and then the other half of the time they're like freaking out that I'm gonna marry a misogynist and run away to Pakistan, and I'm like, who is this person that you think is going to do that? Because the just like the messages about Islam and women are just like so overwhelming all the time, and like from the news, and so it's a lot of stuff about women and oppression, and
Georgia, you getting married?
Colin, can we not do this in front of all these people? This is an inside joke that does not need to be taken to the world.
I wasn't joking. I was just asking you a question.
One other perception or fact, how we look at it, is the multiple wives. That's another issue that not everyone asks, but some people definitely started asking that question. How is it that they can have more than one wife, and how are they supposed to treat you? How could you handle that? And just like kind of dancing around the issue a bit, but asking questions about it.
That question came up, even to me, and I find, you disarm it by using humor. So they said, "Did your friends over there, did they have multiple wives?" And I'm like, "No, they said they could barely afford the one." And so that's very, I said, yes, it's allowed, but in practical purposes, you're not supposed to have, a wife and two wives and two sets of children if you can't support them. And so turning it into instead of this mystical thing, turning it into a kind of a practical question as to how do Muslims actually live their lives, and I found it very useful to kind of get people to drop their guard about it.
I think one of the things that I've seen from sitting with a lot of converts is that the theological questions come up, but the underlying basis is that there is a lot of commonality, and issues that people have with Islam then don't necessarily have to do so much with things that are legalistic or theological, but deal with a lot of issues tied to like race and ethnicity and class. And I think the way Islam gets racialized, especially in this country, has people in a place where the question of why comes up in a lot of different ways. And I think that being one box, but another box being a question of why, that even if this is something that appeals to you, why would you want to do it? Why would you want to pray 5 times a day? Why would you want to fast? Why wouldn't you just eat? And I think, the question of it being tied to a system that's not just about practice and ritual, but a system that's about ethics and ethical conduct, and questions tied to morality, but not in a frame that's always absolute, that you just have what's moral and then immoral, and it's only those 2 boxes, so that there's not real substantive conversation about morality, because it always assumes that anything that's not that must be its absolute opposite. Has people ask a lot of questions well, why would you want to do this, right? In a society that breeds individualism, in a society that tells you, to be very consumer driven, in a society that tells you to really feed your physical, why would you adopt a lifestyle that teaches you to take care of your heart, or to be more focused on your internal or your spirituality or concepts of God at a time when the embracement of that which is secular or liberalism is just an easier option, so to speak. But I think the elements that are tied to race and privilege become very underlying in some of these questions, where even at the surface level it's we share these things in common, or I didn't know that, but it doesn't get to the depth of the otherization that happens when people adopt Islam, right? And we're sitting on a panel right now that has people of very diverse cultural backgrounds, but it's not that to be Muslim is kind of analogous to committing cultural apostasy, which it's not. Like, you are who you are innately, but the society around you, through the racialization of it, would lump us all together in one box, right? Whether we're black, we're brown, we're white, it's just you're all Muslim. And I think some of those questions that get posed through that frame, they might manifest in questions of theology, but they're really kind of rooted in something other than that. Does that something make sense? Yeah. Great. So I'm not gonna make a dua because Georgia made me feel
I didn't say not
but
to. I just commented
just to let
that
you all know,
sometimes they last for half an hour.
there's another event tomorrow. This is part of a broader week that our converts group is doing. If you're not aware of our converts group, it's called Conversations. We put a T in parentheses after the R, so it says Conversations. We do a lot of different events and programs. This entire week is dedicated to programs and events sponsored through that group. So tomorrow there is another program that's going to happen here at 7 that is tied to individuals who are converts and took more of pursuit or a life trajectory tied to like religious scholarship. And then on Friday, the Jummah khutbah will focus on something to do with the convert experience. I don't know what that is because Georgia didn't tell me what to talk about yet.
Because you come into the office an hour before the khutbah and you go, guys, what should I talk about today? And then we give you suggestions and then you talk about something else.
That works. And then Sunday,
He does that on Facebook too.
on Sunday, there's a picnic in Bryant Park. All of our events are open to everybody, but Sunday is for people who are converts, their families, people who are interested in Islam or have converts in their families, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Sunday picnic is for sort of converts and their families and invited guests. So if you are interested in going to a picnic and you're not a convert, just wait one more week and then you can come to the IC picnic, which is open to everybody in Prospect Park.
How welcoming.
Is the convert picnic sponsored by Honest Jobs? Is that what we're going to do?
If you want it to be.
The convert picnic is sponsored by us.
Georgia picked a park that doesn't let you barbecue.
Georgia.
Okay, now this is my fault. It's a potluck. Everybody, we're a diverse group. We can all bring lots of different delicious
You can bring
things.
Honest Jobs.
It's a bigger
Where
picnic
to?
the next week in
Where
Brooklyn.
in Bryant
Just
Park
gonna have
is
some
big?
burgers and hot dogs
We
and
will
vegetarian stuff
As
too.
long as it's
put
allowed.
something. We have to get there early and like stake out a place. So I'll put a thing on Facebook.
So if you have specific questions,
I'll wear
you
this
could just
and then you
ask
can see me from a mile
afterwards.
away.
We have like a very large convert community here. In a given week, anywhere from 1 to 5 people show up at our center on their own. They're interested in Islam. They've lived in a Muslim country. They have friends who are Muslim. They have a significant other who's Muslim. For some, it's a very private experience. For some, it's something that they want to have communal support. We're going to be putting in a lot of time into building out more resources that'll be tied to like real training. So it's not just I feel like helping someone, but if you want to be that resource for somebody who's going through this, then you'll commit yourself to going through the process of being able to learn some of the nuances that go into it. Because as you can see, you have people who share a commonality in La ilaha illallah, but there's still diversity that's there, right? This is not a deen where everybody's just the same. And so for us to recognize that, we can't treat people always as we would expect ourselves to be treated. We have to kind of understand a little bit of the complexity that's there. So we're looking to create some different mentorship type programs, some, big brother type programs, for a lack of better words and descriptions. When that happens, we really need everybody to kind of participate in it. Just as the community is getting larger, and this is a community in the thousands, we just need that many more people to kind of step up and help, not just with this, but with other things. And around like the literacy issues, religious literacy, scholarship, we're hoping, inshallah, before the end of the summer to have someone hired who is a scholar in residence here, will help us to build out more of a robust program structured around that as well. But those are just things for you to be aware of. It says whether you are a convert, you're born into Islam, you can still play a big role in helping us to develop things for this segment of our community. So if you're here, just make that commitment to help us make it that much more of a meaningful and robust entry point into our broader community, inshallah. So we're going to pray Isha in about 5 minutes. We'll call the adhan. People who want to make wudu quick if you need to. And then we'll have our regular halaqah next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.